I've created a new modification for the Fender Rhodes. It's still got a little bit of work to go, but I think this is going to be interesting. Oh man, that feels so much better. That is so different. The Fender Rhodes is an electric piano with a classic sound. 10 years ago I bought this piano and restored it. But there's one issue, and it's that heavy, tiring action. It plays and feels so different to other pianos. The dynamic range, it's just non-existent. The music I create, I like to make soft and heavy parts and mix it up. And it just isn't an option with this piano. And I accepted it. I figured that was part of the piano. It was part of what is a Fender Rhodes. But then recently, I got a Wurlitzer electric piano, and this sits next to the Fender Rhodes. And I think this is the problem. Now, when my Rhodes is next to the Wurlitzer, it's just not going to get played. The electric piano action of the Fender Rhodes, it's just so heavy, and the Wurlitzer's so light and fun. It just keeps asking for more. So I want to make some improvements, but I want to do it in a measured and calculated scientific way, and my plan is to try a few different things. So to allow me to be able to compare the changes I make, I've created a jig that allows the force displacement of a key to be measured and graphed. This works by clamping to the front of the piano. A central bolt applies force to the key, and a number of turns allows the key displacement to be controlled. A digital scale allows the force for each position to be measured, so I simply turn the nut and this gives me a force for that displacement. Hopefully this will allow any improvements to be measured and compared. Me playing the piano is very subjective, and saying how it feels is really hard to compare the subtle differences. So here's a graph for my Fender Rhodes action. The piano is a 1975 piano with half wood hammers and a flat key pedestal. As the key is pressed, the curve ramps up, and there isn't a key point on the curve where you move into aftertouch, and the initial gradient is quite high. The area under the curve, this represents the energy that is used to press the key. Here is a graph for my acoustic piano. This has a much smoother feel compared to the Rhodes. Graph-wise, we're looking at a lot less area under the curve and a lot more defined transition into aftertouch. And just before aftertouch, there's some movement on the graph, and I believe this is the notch feeling you get from when the whip moves out of the way. So let's look at the Wurlitzer piano. So when I first got this, my impression was, oh, this is really fun to play. So I repeated my measurements on this, being careful not to clamp too hard on that front rail. And I was quite surprised at how well defined this graph is. Not much force is required for the motion. This is quite linear motion initially, and then there's a very clear point of where you move into aftertouch. Now it's worth noting that the measurements do not consider dynamic effects, and may not be telling the whole story. And also I didn't do this with the pedal pressed, because I think personally this represents how I play the piano. So to improve the action of the Fender Rhodes, many people perform what's called a bump mod, miracle mod, or magic mod. This is where a bump is put on the key pedestal. This was actually part of the original design that got removed for a period of time, maybe due to cost or manufacturability. But to understand this modification, we need to look at how the Fender Rhodes action works. And the piano action has been reduced to a key, hammer and a damper arm. That appears to be relatively easy to manufacture. When looking at an acoustic piano or Wurlitzer, which features whips, backstops, springs carved into the hinges, it's so much more complex and costly. As the key is pressed, the point of contact between the hammer and the key moves towards the pivot point. As the contact point gets closer to the pivot, the force required to lift the hammer increases. This is like a lever getting shorter. You need to apply more force to generate the same moment. and as the force is ramping up, this creates a ramped feeling which is slow and sapping to play. The other feature of this action is how far the hammer has to move. This defines the minimum energy required to play each note. The bump mod works by having a clear feature that is the contact point between the hammer and the key. This doesn't let the contact point move as far forward as the key is pressed. This reduces this ramping effect seen in the graphs. It also initially raises the hammer up, which reduces the energy required to play the note. The optimum bump position is where it will form a cup and catch the hammer on its return after hitting the tine. So I've installed the bump mod on the section of keys here, and let's play the notes. It does seem a lot better, but it's not quite what I want. I think I still need to improve this. I've played around with the position of the bumps and the size of the bump, and it's still not there. I'm still going to favour the Wurlitzer over the Rhodes as it stands at the minute. It does feel like a lot has improved, but in comparison it's still behind. This is what the graph looks like with the improvements, and the graph does show the improvements. There's an initial steep part of the curve, but then it levels off, becomes linear, and then there's a clear point of aftertouch. So I now know how the bump mod works. The bump mod has a very distinct point where it needs to sit, and this also limits its effectiveness. It's a compromise between catching the hammer on its return and maximising how far from the pivot the contact is. So let's open this up in FreeCAD and see if we can improve on this somehow. So I've modelled the hammer and the key, and the bump mod matches the shape of the hammer when the key is pressed. So let's design a key pedestal that perfectly matches that hammer shape. Let's also move the initial contact point even more, increasing that lever length. So I've come up with 3 different positions to allow for different hammer positions to be accommodated for. So let's 3D print some. So I've 3D printed these, and I'm just going to tape them on for now, as I'm just going to test the piano and see how it feels. Oh wow, that is so much better. I wasn't expecting that. So the key is really light, and it doesn't feel too bad. Like, it's not too light, but yeah, that is very similar to the Wurlitzer in feeling. I wouldn't rate myself very highly on the piano, so it really would like to hear what others have to say on this. If I've missed something really important, please let me know. So there's still a bit more testing I want to do. I'm tempted to create a few more designs in between the designs I've created. I'm also tempted to add a screw that would allow the position to be adjusted for each note. This would allow each key to be set up perfectly. So the reason I made this video was to put this idea out there and try and get some input. So please have a comment below and let me know if I'm going to destroy this piano or make it better. Thank you.